Hey guys, in this anatomy and physiology video, we're taking a look at the artery system for the lower leg. We're taking a look at the arteries that feed the pelvis, the upper leg, the hamstring and thigh muscles, the lower leg, and then we're also going to be taking a look at the foot, the dorsal and the plantar region of the foot. So thanks for joining me, and let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so kicking off the lower body arteries, we're going to be taking a look at the arteries of the pelvis. So just inferior to the descending aorta, you have the common artery. You have a right and a left. Okay, now that common artery also bifurcates into an external iliac and an internal iliac. So just a few things to note here. The external iliac is larger than the internal. And one of the features for the external iliac to keep in mind is that this is the one that's going to turn into the femoral artery just past the pubis bone here. Okay, so just keep that in mind as we move along. So another feature, let me zoom in just a little bit. You can see here, it's a little hard to see. It's a lot of traffic going on. This is called the inferior epigastric artery. Now, this one, as I rotate it, you can see it's it's kind of going up into the epigastric area. This supplies blood to the abdominal wall, the surface abdominal region, anyways. Keep in mind also with the abdomen, you have those muscle fibers. There are different layers, and each one of those layers, the muscle fibers go in different directions, pulling the torso in different ways. Okay, so just keep that in mind. So now let's go a little bit more posterior. So as you can see, it kind of turns into the pelvis. This is your inferior iliac. Okay, so the inferior iliac has a little bit more to talk about. Now we won't get super detailed into it, but we'll hit the highlights. One of the highlights, let's see here, you're going to see the superior gluteal. Okay, so I'm going to twist our pelvis to the back. You can see on the posterior end. So that gluteal, the superior gluteal, this is going to supply muscles to the glutes. Okay, as given by the name superior gluteal. All right, now not just the glutes, but the skin, the surface of the glutes. Let's pick another one here that goes off of the inferior or the interior iliac. So here you have the obturator, and as you can see there, that the obturator is basically hugging the rim of the obturator foramen, right, of the pelvis. And then you have the iliolumbar, just like the obturator, hugging the rim of the pelvis, the iliac of the pelvis bone. Okay, your ilium. And of course, these are supplying blood to the pelvic region, and then finally you're going to have your internal pudendal. Okay. Now the internal pudendal, this one supplies blood to the external genitalia for the male and the female. And as you might imagine, the plumbing down there is going to be a little bit different from the male and the female. But either way, that it does supply blood to the external genitalia for both male and female. Now, back in my EMT days, one of the things to keep in mind with this area, especially when we were approaching an MVA, a motor vehicle accident, we always wanted to be careful, or if somebody took a nasty fall, be it a skateboarding accident or a construction accident, especially construction accidents, because you never know what kind of surface you're going to land on, or like I said, a motor vehicle accident. The impact, the forces of these types of accidents can cause a lot of damage on the pelvis, and particularly with the pelvis with falls, because typically you're going to fall, you might fall on one leg or on the side, and there's almost always, again, depending on the height and the amount of force, but you always want to be careful, and you always worry about a pelvic fracture, and maybe even worse, one of these major arteries rupturing inside of the pelvis, because it's super dangerous to have one of these rupture, because you're going to have a lot of internal bleeding, and you don't really know because it's internal, but you just got to be really careful, because somebody could bleed out and pass away because of something like that. So in these types of incidents, I remember we were just being very careful and moving people very gingerly for that reason. Okay, so let's go ahead and make our way now more inferior. So as I mentioned before, your external iliac will become your femoral artery. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the area right here. Let me zoom in. This area right here. Okay, this is called the femoral triangle. So I'm gonna take you to another shot of what we're looking at here when we talk about the femoral triangle. So taking a closer look at the femoral triangle, one of the first things I want to mention is that it does make the shape of a triangle. So you have the base border, which is the inguinal ligament. You have the lateral border, the sartorius muscle, the longest muscle in the body. And then in the medial border, you have the adductor longus. So this femoral triangle, it's important because of the things that run through it. Okay, now we're not going to get super in depth into it, but for the most part, we want to discuss that the fact that the femoral vein runs through it. You have part of the nervous system, the femoral vein. I'm sorry, not the vein, but the femoral nerve. Okay, you also have the femoral lymph nodes, and then of course you have the femoral artery, which we're highlighting in our video. So this again is the femoral triangle. So let's go back to our circulatory aspect of this particular video. So just past the inguinal ligament, we have now the femoral artery. As I'm zooming out, you can see that it's the most prominent one pictured here, highlighted. And this is the one that this is the main trunk that provides blood to the lower extremities here. And so there's a couple of things that I want to highlight. First of all, okay, this is the profunda femoris. This is the deep femoral artery. This is the one that feeds anteriorly. It feeds the quadriceps, and then posteriorly, it feeds the hamstring groups. Okay, so this is the profunda femoris, and then just going right back up. All right, so you can see here that there's a little bit of branching that I want to highlight. This one is the circumflex femoral artery. This is the medial one, and as you can see, it wraps around the head of the femur. And then you have just a pinch lateral to that, you have the circumflex femoral lateral artery. And this one also wraps around the head of the, or the neck of the femur. And as you can see, there's an ascending branch, and then there's one that wraps around laterally to it. Okay, and so moving along, we have now the popliteal artery. Now this one's very interesting. You know, this one brings some to mind. Oh man, some pretty disturbing. Okay, so let me give you a heads up. The following image is pretty disturbing, but it's an injury, and it really does pertain to what we're looking at here with the popliteal artery. Zach Miller, who was a tight end for the Chicago Bears, he was actually a tight end for the Seattle Seahawks, and I saw him play when I lived in Seattle. So this is why this one reminds me so. This one sticks out so much to me because I've seen this guy play in person, and so when this happened to him when he was in Chicago, it was like, oh, it was just terrible to watch, especially to know that when I saw the injury happen, or when I saw it on TV anyways, and when he was in Chicago, one of my first thoughts was how terrible it was, but then like, man, his career might be over the way his knee hyperextended. It hyperextended so much so that in fact some of my worst fears kind of did come about, in the sense that he actually did rupture this popliteal artery behind his knee. Okay, so he hyperextended, and not just that, but some of the things to consider with this is that, as you can see here, that this popliteal artery fits nice and snug back here, but that's not the only circuitry or plumbing, if you will, that runs through there. You also have the vein, and you also have part of your sciatic nerve that runs down there. And he did damage that, and there was fears that he might actually lose his leg. He might get an amputation, and some of the things that were said, or some of the things that he said during this, was that he was telling the doctors not to cut off his leg. Fortunately, he went through surgery and he got everything fixed up. Now he's not playing football anymore, of course, but yeah, I mean, I can't imagine how he is right now. Not just that, but look, you got to consider all these ligaments: your meniscus, your PCL, and then tucked inside here, your ACL. I can't imagine those things did not sever. I don't remember. I'd have to go back and look at the injury report for him, but or even your patella ligament, or who knows what other damage was done to his knee, the way it hyperextended. You have the your arterial lateral. I mean, I've strained these ligaments before, and oh man, is it so painful. But I can't imagine what he must have gone through. So, in any case, the popliteal ligament or popliteal artery. One of the things to keep in mind with this particular aspect of the knee too is that you may have heard of people fainting while standing up too long. I've actually seen it. I was at a Christmas program for a school once, and I saw a kid collapse on stage. And so, one of the things that will happen is that if you lock your knees sitting up straight, you actually can pinch. You can pinch not just the nerves, but you can also pinch blood flow, and it will keep blood flow from going back to your brain, and actually you'll faint. So it's something to keep in mind. And then also on top of that, you also have your sleepy leg. You ever felt that before, where it feels like you have needles inside of your leg? Well, depending on how you're sitting, and even somewhat your genetics, you can actually pinch blood flow to your lower leg. And if you're pinching blood flow, that means you're pinching nutrients to the nerves, and the nerves will actually shut down. They'll kind of go on hibernate, if you will, like your computer. They'll go to sleep for a bit, and then once you start moving again, the blood flow rushes back, and it kind of shocks it a little bit, and that's how you feel the pins or the needle stabbing you in the leg or in the foot when your leg falls asleep because you were sitting in an awkward position for too long. And a lot of it has to do with the popliteal artery that you have running behind your leg. So keep that in mind. Pretty interesting part of the body there. Now, so as we're making our way down, this is the descending genicular, and then we have the fibular peroneal, okay, and then you have the anterior tibial artery, and then the posterior tibial artery. So keep that in mind. This is behind the tibia. So that's the posterior tibial. Go back to it, and then warping our way around, that's the anterior tibial. Now, this one came to mind also for a football injury with Alex Smith from the Washington football team. He had, I forgot how many surgeries. It was upwards past 10 surgeries, I believe, because he had infections and he had all kinds of tissue damage, artery, vein, nerve. He actually made it back to play for the NFL, I think for another year or two before he retired. But in any case, when he snapped his leg in half, he had a lot of arterial damage, a lot of bleeding from damage to his leg to these particular arteries in the lower leg. All right, so last but not least, we have the arteries of the foot. Now, one of the approaches to take here is to look at the anterior tibialis, the anterior tibial artery, the posterior and the anterior, because each of these feeds, the anterior feeds the dorsal aspect of the foot, the front part, and then the posterior tibial artery feeds the plantar section of the foot. Plantar, if you're familiar with the plantar fascia, like if you ever had plantar fasciitis, I do have a video on that. So in any case, let's go ahead and start off with the anterior tibial. And as you can see here, as I rotate it forward, it branches off into the dorsalis pedis. This is where you take the pulse on the foot. And then you have also the lateral tarsal, which will then lead to the dorsal digital, okay? For your pinky toe. And then for your big toe, going back to the dorsalis pedis, you'll notice that it branches also. It branches into the dorsal metatarsals, the top of the foot. But before that, you have the arcuate artery. Okay, so the arcuate, that leads into the metatarsals. And then, as I mentioned before, your dorsal digital arteries. Now, one of the things for this one is that this is typically where you'll check for circulation if you have an injury on the top, on the more superior aspect of the leg, be it a broken femur or tibia, fibula, whatever the case may be. Like if you have a major break, a major injury there, one of the fears is that you might cut off circulation to the bottom of the foot, and then you want to quickly get into surgery for that because you don't want the tissues down in the feet or leg to go without oxygen for a very long time. And so you'll do capillary refills where essentially you kind of press on the toes and see if if the blood will return to the toes, or you'll check the dorsalis pedis for a pulse. Because if you don't have a pulse, that means you have an occlusion or a rupture somewhere superior to that, and that can be very dangerous. So wrapping around to the posterior, as I mentioned before, you have the posterior tibial, and then you have on the bottom, okay, you have it branching off into the medial plantar and also the lateral plantar, right? Because that's the lateral aspect, and then you have the medial aspect. And that medial aspect will go into the medial plantar, and just like on the dorsal aspect, you have also an arch. Okay, you have a deep plantar arch, which branches off into your plantar-metatarsals, and then ultimately your common plantar, and then your common digital. Your proper plantar digital on the inferior aspect of the toes. Okay, well, that does it for us in the arteries of the lower limbs. I hope you learned something new there, and stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next one.